At my brother's wedding, I wasn't mentioned in the speech, the slideshow, or the family photo. When I asked why, his bride smirked and said, "Honestly, we didn't want background characters to ruin our memories." I nodded, sat down at my table by the exit, then quietly canceled the catering final payment. The meal course never even made it to the tables. I, 29M, never thought I'd be the one to ruin my brother's wedding, but sometimes people push you so far that you snap in ways you never imagined. The day started like any other wedding day should. I woke up in the hotel room next to the venue, pressed my suit, and checked my phone one last time before heading down. My brother had asked me to handle the final catering payment since I worked in event management and knew the vendor personally. It was supposed to be my contribution to their special day, a $15,000 final payment for a 5-course dinner that would feed 200 guests. I'd been looking forward to this day for months. My brother and I weren't super close growing up, but we'd gotten better as adults. When he got engaged last year, I thought it might bring us closer together. I was wrong. The ceremony went smoothly enough. I sat in the third row with my parents, watched my brother exchange vows with his bride, and felt genuinely happy for them. The bride looked stunning, my brother was beaming, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. I even teared up a little when they kissed. But then came the reception. The cocktail hour passed without incident. I mingled, made small talk with relatives I hadn't seen in years, and waited for the formal dinner to begin. That's when the first blow came. My brother stood up to give his speech, thanking everyone who had supported them throughout their relationship. He mentioned his college roommate, who introduced them. He thanked his bride's parents for welcoming him into their family. He thanked his best man, his groomsmen, even his boss who let him take time off for the honeymoon. He never mentioned me. Not once. I figured maybe he was nervous and forgot. It happens. But then came the slideshow. They'd put together this elaborate presentation of their relationship journey. Photos from their first date, trips they'd taken together, family gatherings, holidays. There were pictures of the bride with her sister, my brother with his college friends, group shots from various celebrations. I wasn't in a single photo. Not one. I knew I'd been at some of those events. I specifically remembered the Christmas party from last year where they announced their engagement. I was standing right next to them when they made the announcement, but somehow I'd been cropped out of every single image they used. The final insult came during the family photo session. The photographer was organizing different combinations, bride's family, groom's family, immediate family only. When it came time for the groom's immediate family photo, they called for my parents and my brother. That was it. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to notice the oversight. My mother glanced at me with confusion, but before she could say anything, the bride stepped forward and positioned herself next to my brother. The photographer started clicking away. I felt invisible. After the photos, I approached my brother quietly and asked why I wasn't included in any of the formal moments. I kept my voice low, not wanting to cause a scene at their wedding. That's when his bride turned to me with this smile that didn't reach her eyes and delivered the line that changed everything. She told me, quite honestly, that they didn't want background characters to ruin their memories. Background characters. That's what I was to them. Not family. Not even a supporting player in their life story. Just background noise that needed to be edited out. I nodded politely, smiled, and walked back to my assigned table. Table 12. By the exit. Far from the head table, far from family, far from anyone who mattered. I sat down and pulled out my phone. The catering manager answered on the second ring. I'd worked with him on dozens of events over the past 3 years, and he trusted me completely. When I told him there had been a change of plans and that the final payment needed to be held, he didn't question it. The food service was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. I watched the room buzzing with anticipation. Guests were finishing their cocktails, taking their seats, chatting about how beautiful the ceremony had been. The bride and groom were making their rounds, accepting congratulations and posing for more photos. Nobody noticed when the catering staff started packing up the food in the kitchen. Nobody noticed when the servers stopped setting out the dinner plates. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 45. People started checking their watches. Conversations turned to speculation about when dinner would be served. The bride looked increasingly agitated as she realized something was wrong. That's when the catering manager approached the head table. I watched from my seat by the exit as he explained the situation to my brother and his new wife. The final payment hadn't cleared, which meant they couldn't serve the meal. Standard contract policy. No exceptions. My brother's face went through several shades of confusion and panic. He immediately looked toward our father, assuming there had been some banking error. Dad pulled out his phone, probably checking his account balance, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. The bride was less composed. Even from across the room, I could see her gesturing frantically, her voice rising above the ambient chatter. She kept pointing toward the kitchen, then toward the guests, clearly demanding that someone fix this immediately. But there was nothing to fix. The catering company had followed protocol exactly. No final payment meant no food service. The deposit and partial payments they'd received would cover the preparation costs, but the actual dinner required that final $15,000 transfer. The catering manager gave them 20 minutes to resolve the payment issue. After that, his staff would need to move on to their next event. I sat calmly at table 12, watching the chaos unfold. My brother approached several family members, asking if anyone could cover the payment temporarily. Uncle Robert said he didn't have that kind of cash available on short notice. Cousin Mike offered to put it on his credit card, but his limit wasn't high enough. The bride's parents looked mortified but explained they'd already stretched their budget for the wedding dress and flowers. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The catering staff began loading their equipment back onto the trucks. That's when my brother spotted me across the room and started walking over. His face was red, his perfect wedding hair disheveled from running his hands through it. I could see the exact moment when realization hit him. He asked me what had happened with the payment. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the desperation underneath. I told him very simply that I decided not to make the payment after all. The confusion on his face was almost comical. He asked why, as if he genuinely couldn't understand what had changed between this morning and now. So I reminded him what his wife had said about background characters. I explained that since I was apparently just background noise in their story, I figured my contribution should be background level as well. Background characters don't make $15,000 payments for the main character's dinner service. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I stood up from my chair, smoothed down my suit jacket, and told him I hoped they enjoyed the rest of their special day. Then I walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The last thing I saw before leaving was 200 wedding guests sitting at empty tables, staring at decorative centerpieces while their stomachs growled and the catering trucks drove away. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days straight. My brother called 17 times in the first hour alone. When I finally answered, he was furious. He accused me of ruining the most important day of his life over a petty misunderstanding. I told him there was no misunderstanding. His wife had made it crystal clear where I stood in their lives. He tried to backtrack, claiming she didn't mean it the way it sounded, that she was just stressed about the wedding photos and said something stupid. He begged me to call the catering company and authorize a late payment so they could at least get some food delivered. But it was too late for that. The catering company had moved on to their Saturday night event. All their staff and equipment were committed elsewhere. Mom called crying. She said guests were asking her what happened, and she didn't know what to tell them. Some people had left immediately when they realized dinner wasn't coming. Others ordered pizza to the venue, turning the elegant wedding reception into an awkward pizza party. Dad's call was different. He was disappointed, but he asked me to explain what had really happened. When I told him about the speech, the photos, and the bride's comment, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said he'd noticed I wasn't included in the family photo, but he'd assumed it was just an oversight in the chaos of the moment. The bride's family was less understanding. Her mother left me a voicemail that I probably shouldn't repeat, but the general theme was that I was a selfish, vindictive person who had destroyed their daughter's perfect day. By Monday, the story had spread through our entire extended family. Social media made it worse. Several cousins had posted about the weirdest wedding ever, where the dinner just disappeared halfway through the reception. Some relatives took my side, saying they'd also noticed how I was excluded from everything. Others thought I'd gone too far, that I should have handled it like an adult instead of sabotaging the wedding. But the most interesting call came from my brother's college roommate, the same one who'd been thanked in the speech. He told me he'd been confused about my absence from everything too. Apparently, he'd asked my brother about it during the cocktail hour, wondering why his own brother wasn't in the wedding party or the family photos. My brother had told him it was complicated, that I was difficult to work with, and they decided to keep things simple. Difficult to work with. That was news to me. Update 2. 3 weeks after the wedding, my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted. His honeymoon tan had faded, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He asked if we could talk. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity won out. He sat on my couch and started talking. Really talking, for the first time in years. Apparently, his new wife had been planning to minimize my role in their wedding for months. She'd convinced him that having me too involved would complicate things, that it would be easier to keep the wedding party small and the family photos simple. She'd argued that I was always trying to take over events because of my job, that I would turn their wedding into a business opportunity or use it to network with the vendors. None of that was true, but my brother had listened to her anyway. He admitted that he'd felt guilty about excluding me, but his wife had framed it as protecting their special day from potential drama. She'd even suggested that I might be jealous of their relationship and try to cause problems. The irony wasn't lost on me. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. 3 days after the wedding, his wife had laughed about the whole situation with her sister. She'd called it hilarious that I'd actually followed through with sabotaging the dinner. She said it proved she was right about me being vindictive and jealous. She wasn't sorry about what she'd said. She was amused by my reaction. My brother said he'd started seeing his wife differently after that conversation. He'd married someone who found genuine pleasure in other people's pain. He apologized for everything. The exclusion, the photos, allowing his wife to treat me like I didn't matter. He said he'd been so focused on avoiding conflict with her that he'd forgotten to protect the people who actually mattered to him. I accepted his apology, but I told him it didn't fix anything. The damage was done, not just to the wedding, but to our relationship. He'd chosen to believe the worst about me without ever asking for my side of the story. He asked what he could do to make things right. I told him there wasn't anything. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I did have one question for him. Was his marriage worth destroying his relationship with his family? He didn't have an answer. Update 3. 6 months later, my brother filed for divorce. I wasn't involved in that decision, and I didn't celebrate when I heard the news. Watching someone's marriage fall apart isn't satisfying, even when that person hurt you. But I did learn some interesting details through family gossip. Apparently, the wedding incident was just the beginning. His wife had systematically started cutting him off from friends and family members she deemed problematic. Anyone who questioned her behavior or sided with me about the wedding found themselves excluded from future gatherings. She'd convinced him that our parents were too critical of her, that his college friends were immature influences, that his work colleagues were jealous of their relationship. Within 6 months, my brother had become isolated from everyone except his wife and her family. The final straw came when she demanded he cut contact with our parents entirely after Mom made a casual comment about missing the old version of my brother. That's when he realized what had happened. He'd married someone who needed to be the only important person in his life, and she was willing to destroy every other relationship he had to maintain that position. The divorce was messy. She fought for half of everything, including the house he'd owned before they met. She hired an expensive lawyer and tried to paint him as financially abusive for not giving her access to all his accounts. But karma has a funny way of working out. During the discovery process, her lawyer found out about the wedding incident. When they tried to use it as evidence of my brother's family being vindictive and unsupportive, it backfired spectacularly. The story of how his wife had deliberately excluded his brother from the wedding, then mocked him for having a natural human reaction to being treated cruelly, didn't make her look like the victim she was pretending to be. Instead, it made her look exactly like what she was, someone who enjoyed hurting people and then playing innocent when they fought back. My brother reached out to me during the divorce proceedings, not for support or advice, just to update me on what was happening. He said he finally understood why I'd reacted the way I did at the wedding. He told me that if someone had treated his wife's brother the way she treated me, he would have been furious. The fact that he'd allowed it to happen to his own brother was something he'd have to live with forever. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but I wasn't ready to rebuild our relationship yet. Trust, once broken, takes time to repair, and some wounds need to heal before you can even think about forgiveness. But for the first time in months, I felt like my brother was actually seeing me as a person again instead of an obstacle to his happiness. Final update. It's been over a year since the wedding now. My brother and I talk occasionally. Not like we used to, but we're working on it. He's in therapy, dealing with how he lost himself in that relationship and learning to rebuild his connections with people who actually care about him. He paid me back the $15,000, even though I never asked for it. He said it was important to him that he take responsibility for the consequences of his choices. I donated the money to a local food bank. It seemed fitting somehow. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. His ex-wife moved back to her hometown, and as far as I know, she's already engaged to someone else. I genuinely hope she's found someone who makes her happy enough that she doesn't need to tear down the people around her anymore. Looking back, I don't regret what I did at the wedding. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was an overreaction, but sometimes people need to face real consequences for their actions before they understand how much they've hurt others. I'd spent years being the reliable brother, the one who handled logistics and solved problems and never caused drama. But being reliable and accommodating doesn't protect you from people who see kindness as weakness. Sometimes you have to show people that there are limits to how much you'll tolerate before you push back. My brother learned that his wife was willing to sacrifice his family relationships for her own comfort. I learned that I won't accept being treated as less than human, even by people I love. And 200 wedding guests learned that you should probably have a backup dinner plan, just in case. Was it worth it? I honestly don't know. But I do know that I sleep better at night knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered, even if the method was unconventional. And the next time someone tries to treat me like a background character in my own family story, they'll remember what happened at that wedding. Because sometimes the background characters are the ones holding everything together, and you don't realize how important they are until they're gone. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.